Hello, everyone, and welcome to Y Delta's AMA. Today, I am sitting here with Aaron, our COO.
Hi guys.
Aaron and I have been working together for years and years. It feels like an eternity almost now. Um, we've seen and worked with a lot of these legacy systems that we're talking about today in this episode because recently we published this article called 10 Reasons to Move Away from Legacy Systems. We'll make sure to link to it below if you haven't read it. But maybe for those who are not so keen on reading a full article on 10 reasons to move away from a legacy system, maybe Aaron, you can just give some of your highlights, what you've seen out there as the top, let's say, two or three reasons to move away from a legacy system.
Yeah, of course. I mean, 10 reasons is very limited, right? Because there's a lot of reasons why you should move away from a legacy system. But to highlight a couple in the article that I think is the biggest things to look at is first of all, the expense that goes into maintaining a legacy system. This is everything from maintaining that you have the developers that worked on the system from day one, because if you change your developers or get new developers because they move on or whatever, you need to train them in that system, and the bigger the system gets, the harder it is to maintain and everyone have knowledge and overview of that project. Obviously as well, if your legacy system is a monolithical project, then the technology involved is also very difficult to maintain, because as technology changes, you have to change your whole system in one go. So they said creates a lot of expense. Um, Also, a legacy system, if it's built with older technologies, as more and more people start using the platform, that can become an issue that you need to maintain the servers, keep them up and running, and yeah, that causes a lot of expense. The other, this actually goes on into my second, I think, most crucial point, is the gap between legacy and the current trends, which I've basically just mentioned into. Um, I mean, you can look at a lot of legacy systems out there. One of them is banks, that we'll mention in a minute. But banks is their systems are so old, but they're secure, but they don't meet with the current trends of the technologies that are needed or the customer requirements that are needed. Um, so this is a huge problem with the current systems, and moving away from legacy systems and building something that's more manageable and more maintainable is definitely the way forward here.
Yeah. Something that we also introduced in the article that I think is important for people to take away is technical debt. We know, most of us who run businesses or organizations, we know about financial debt. We've seen that on our balance sheet or income statement, but something that most people haven't seen, especially non-technical people, is technical debt. As you build a new system, technical debt is zero. You have a new shiny system operating and everybody's happy. But then you have new feature requests and new devices coming out, and new protocols, new operating systems, new bunch of things. And that means you need to keep up, but in order for you to adapt to the next technology curve, it just becomes harder and harder, more and more maintenance, as you mentioned, Aaron. And your technical debt sort of slowly but surely creeps up on you. And what happens a lot in organizations, especially organizations that have been operating for years now, they have this technical debt that is insanely high, like almost unimaginable for people who are not sitting in the IT department. And they get frustrated, the IT department gets frustrated because they can't do what they want. Like, a lot of people have good intentions, but this technical debt really crumbles innovation in a lot of organizations.
Yeah, and the old trends of developing, which is changing now, is to have these monolithical services that run with each other, that are completely dependent on each other. And the bigger these systems get, the more the technical debt grows, because You need automated testing in there. You need to know exactly what's happening in the program, and just bringing a new member into a team increases the technical debt tenfold, because everyone needs to teach that guy. That guy needs to know. Adding more tests to the program also does that, because the testers need to be able to speak to the developers, so the developers cannot be able to achieve what they want to do. So yeah, the technical debt on current, or let's say previous builds, or with previous monolithical architectures, single programs, is getting too high these days for most larger projects.
And especially documentation, as you mentioned, can be an issue. More people get involved in the system. Some people leave. I mean, in the beginning, you typically build a system where you document a lot. Everything is well documented, and then you change something, a feature is updated, whatever, and then you forget to update documentation. And over the years, back to the technical debt piling up, over the years the documentation becomes super outdated.
Yeah, no one maintains documentation the way they should. I mean, it's always good at the start, but then you'll have whoever the stakeholders or the users of the system or whatever need something new and fast, so you go and change it, but you don't necessarily push the documentation out there. So it when a new person comes in, or even a developer that's worked on it for a long time comes back to a certain functionality, they don't remember how it was coded or whatever, so it can take 10 times longer to do a simple change in a project that it would have taken when they first did it, for example.
Exactly. And my favorite example, I know I've been mentioning this many times, if you watch YDelta on YouTube or other articles, other medias, I talk a lot about this famous example of the oil tanker being connected to a financial bank's legacy system. So typically what has happened in organizations, well-established organizations, is they started to embrace the IT revolution in the 80s, maybe even 70s. And these old mainframe systems that they run on, most of them, I mean, the developers who built it back in the 70s and 80s, they either retired at this point or they are not here anymore. So it's super, super hard to maintain this mainframe system. What has also happened is back then there was more outages and electricity drops than we see today. The infrastructure is better today than it was back then. So they even connected this mainframe system to an oil tanker. So if there was an outage of electricity, you sort of started this oil tanker so the system could keep running. So just to give an idea of how old some of these systems are. And I know, Aaron, you have done some research and know a little bit about how these banks and old financial institutions work. Maybe you can talk a little bit about how they can get out of legacy systems and how they manage all this.
Yeah. Before we go into that, actually, you came up with a good example just now, and that's a similar example which actually leads into the banks, is that all the government systems back in the day, and I've forgotten the name of the coding technology they used, it begins with C, I want to say COBOL, yeah. And basically they have all these servers which actually have reel-to-reel backup and data, which is very old school, and they decided to try to keep up with the trend and get out their legacy system, to fire all their developers and hire new developers that could work on the newer technologies. And then they forgot maintenance, and the system started to fail, and there's points of failures. So then they had to hire these developers back, and they had to hire these developers back at way more than what they let them go at. So it's examples that people think the legacy system is easy to switch from, but it's actually very difficult, and it takes a lot of planning. Which goes into the banks. I did some research into the banks because that's, I think, is one of the current conversations, because the bank systems have been around for years and they are probably one of the biggest legacy systems we have at the moment. And it's not a question of do we think we'll get out of the legacy system. It's a question of they have to get out of the legacy system. They have no choice. And the banks know this, and they're trying to do changes currently, but the problem is it's this concept of if it ain't broke, don't touch it, sort of thing. And I did some research in the UK. If some of you might know, I'm from the UK. Last year, three of the big banks actually did change some of their services away from the legacy into the newer technologies, and they had massive outages in 2019, which really was a massive fail. So it's very difficult, and the biggest problem is they don't have skills in house. They don't have developers in the bank that can do this sort of thing. So they turn to fintech companies. Because there's a lot of new fintech companies coming in the market now and starting up, and they have their added issues because you need a fintech group that can take your whole legacy system and build the whole system from the security side. They need to deal with your customer data. They need to add all your services. So it's a huge job, but it will happen. It's just a matter of when. Yeah.
Who do you see as the decision maker typically? Like the guy or the girl, woman sitting, deciding on this? Because I can imagine people who don't see technical debt, they only see financial debt. On the business side, they won't be the best people to decide on whether to move away or maintain or whatever you might be able to do with your system.
Yeah. But I mean, there is many decision makers, but from my experience, where we've come into working with legacy systems, there's a block at one level of the decision makers. I mean, the developers know that we need to build a new system. We need to move away from legacy. The product owners know the same. But when you get up to the stakeholder level, that's normally where we see a block, because the stakeholders see a product that's already running and they're like, okay, we can just change it. We can make small changes. We don't need to rebuild this product. We have it. Because they don't have the understanding that eventually down the line this is going to cost them way more money, or they will just task everyone to find a cheaper way to do the same solution with the current legacy system, not knowing eventually that one day this system will literally, probably a ticking time bomb, just stop working. And we have seen this. We've seen systems that have just completely shut down because, I mean, browsers are evolving. Daily there's always new updates for browsers, and something that worked yesterday might not work today in a browser. Servers the same, because every single server out there is running an operating system. We recently saw that Microsoft has stopped supporting Windows 7, and there's a lot of systems going down on those systems, and it's exactly the same with servers that they run on Windows or Linux. And as these operating systems die, the products start dying on them. So there always has to be an evolution going on there. And I think from my experience, every time I've been talking to a company about legacy systems, it's the stakeholders that are the hardest ones to get to buy in to why they need to change. So I think my message out there is basically if stakeholders should try to listen a bit more to the experts below them and try to understand the situations and weigh up, okay, there might be a bigger cost now, but in the long run, the cost will be so much cheaper. And the fact that they will have a new system that is built in a better way, they can service their customers much faster with their requests. They can make sure the system is probably even more secure than it is now, and provide a better service. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, bringing in the experts, I think it's in short supply sometimes also for these organizations. But I think also it is a little bit difficult for managers, CEOs, whatever, because they don't see these issues typically. Like this technical debt creeps up on them as a big surprise, and only when the toilet is burning, you fix the issue. Like in 2009, what you mentioned, bringing in fintech companies.
Mm-hmm.
It's a hard thing to predict. Like if it ain't broken, as you said, why go fix it, right?
Yeah.
Sort of a logic that you see a lot out there, at least.
And that is the problem, because normally inside the organization they may have some development team, but they've worked with that legacy system for so long, they kind of have blinkers to working with that system. So one of the ways to maybe get out of this legacy is to look outside, to look at FinTech groups, look at outsourcing to different companies. And this is where people get scared, because they think that there's going to be a massive point of failure here. But if you find the right partnership, the right people to work with, you won't have that. You will actually have someone outside that has new, fresh ideas and can actually get you out of this this place where you're stuck and actually help you evolve the system. So it's just about finding a fintech group when it comes to banks, or if you have any other system, just finding an agency out there that wants to work with you and build a partnership to build something that will last for a long time.
Nice.
Yeah.
So what's the typical solution that you see out there? I mean, we can all agree, I think, that technical debt, legacy systems, all that stuff is to be avoided. I don't think anybody in the financial industry or any other industry that has a legacy system are doing or building a legacy system because they're evil. It just sort of happens as the years go by. So what do you typically see as a solution for people to...
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? I mean, we identify these problems are here, but how do we move away from them? Yeah. There's no one rule for this, but from my experience, I would say the first thing is you're never going to go into a company and understand their system. If that system's been around for 25 years, you're not going to go in and understand their database, their code, or anything like that. So the easiest way for me is to go in and find what we call the lowest hanging fruit and find the small thing you can start on. So we could go in, we can find a project where it could be as simple as redoing their landing page so it's easier for the marketing team to work on it, or take a service out of the legacy system, like a messaging service, and rebuild it standalone, still talking to the legacy system. Because then you start to build with that project, you start to build the basis of the new system. And this kind of goes into what is the best architecture now to go into, because the newest trend, and it's actually not even a trend, it's the most sensible way to go, is to move away from monolithical builds, to these massive projects, and move into microservices. Because this way you can build your entire project in smaller little chunks that are independent services that can be rebuilt at any time. This isn't good for every single project out there, but I could say a good chunk of those projects could do with having a microservice build, so the project can always evolve. You can add new microservices, you can take them away, and so forth. The other option is to look into third-party services, because why reinvent the wheel? I mean, if something already exists, payment gateway, maybe a message system, maybe a system for storing your media, why create that yourself? So I recommend moving into third-party is a good idea, but you have to do it sensibly. So every time you use a third-party service, build a layer of protection between your project and the third-party service. So something in the middle that will communicate between the two. Because, I mean, the good thing about having a third-party service is they maintain everything. You don't need to worry about that project, but that service could disappear one day. So if you build this layer in the middle, you can easily switch to the third-party services, or one comes along that has a bit more functionality than the previous one had. So you can introduce that without really affecting your main project.
What could be an example of a third-party API, just for the non-technical people out there who can relate a little bit? Is it like a financial provider? Is it an accounting software that you tap into? Or?
It's all of those, right? I mean, the biggest two, I guess, would be a payment gateway or a invoicing system, right? I mean, we've worked with Economic and some other services here, and they are the biggest ones, because imagine let's actually take Economic, right? Economic is a third-party service, so you're rebuilding your system, and you want to do invoicing inside Denmark. So Economic is probably a good solution. So then you build this layer in between so it can communicate, but then you want to expand your market, and you want to go to, I don't know, France or something, and they have a completely different invoicing system from Economic. So then you have the choice of adding another third party to this layer. So this layer in between the code and your third-party systems can talk to either system easily. And that's not talking about moving away from legacy systems, but again, it's still protecting you, because if economic died tomorrow, you can just replace it with another third-party service. So,
I see.
yeah.
Nice. And microservices especially is a big trend, as you say. It's been going on for some time now, but it's really picking up fast. We build it a lot here in Delta when we build projects and different systems. We always try to adopt microservices. It seems to be where the technology sector is heading in general. No way to fight against it, and no reason to. And that's actually the next subject that we have for our next newsletter, our next articles. So if you're not subscribed already, head over to whitedelta.com, sign up, drop your email, and you get the latest news within technology, web, mobile, everything in between. You can also get a free ebook. We have written a book named Software is Feeding the World. Again, if you drop your email, you actually get a free version of the ebook. So feel free to do that, of course. Any last words, Aaron, before we close up?
I was just going to say, listen out for that microservice, talk and the article, because in the last 6 months we've actually mastered microservices finally. So it will be a very interesting read to hear about what we've learned about them.
Awesome. Well, guys, until then, I will see you for the next one.